listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Happy Monday. Welcome to the briefing. In case you missed it, it's the King's birthday. That's right, Tara Cassidy up in Queensland, who's not enjoying a public holiday today. Neither am I, and I'm in New South Wales. But anyway, and for one of our footy codes over the past decade, it's become a day of blue beanies and Aussie celebs freezing their tits off.
You don't have to love footy to love Ariana Titmus, Mark Taylor, Cadell Evans. There's just a whole cavalcade of Australia's greatest sporting names, all dressing up in ridiculous costumes and all going down a slide into a huge ice bath.
That deep dive into one of our country's most visible health campaigns, the Big Freeze, is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Monday, the 9th of June.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, there's 830 Australians named in this year's King's Birthday Honours list, including former PM Scott Morrison. Not for this moment.
Take me to the April sun in Cuba.
Whoa.
Rather ones like this.
Stop hoarding. I can't be more blunt about it. Stop it.
Leading the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, one of the other names on the list was director Baz Luhrmann, known for his films including Strictly Ballroom, The Great Gatsby and the recent Elvis biopic.
With me, I've always wanted to fly fast, faster than the speed of light to the rock of eternity.
And Luhrmann's wife, costume designer Catherine Martin, both recognised for their contributions to the arts.
Yeah, TV personality Deborah Hutton's been honoured for services to the community for her work raising awareness about skin cancer and her time in the media. Meantime, one of the 412 people awarded an Order of Australia Medal, or an OAM, this year was Julie Anne Finney, the mum of a veteran who died by suicide that, Tara, you actually interviewed in recent weeks.
And there's 3,000, and that's from the Royal Commission, that have passed away by suicide since 1997, and we're not getting any closer to lowering the weekly numbers. Put me in there. Let me meet with the next Prime Minister, because I need to tell him that his ministers are not working.
Julianne's been fiercely campaigning for reform within the ADF and was recognised for her ongoing service to veteran welfare. If you do want to listen to that chat between Julie and Tara, the link to that will be in the show notes. Now, very briefly before we get on to the next headline, news of this list did get leaked over the weekend, and obviously the big headline was that Scott Morrison was being awarded for his leadership during the pandemic, and the reaction online was very interesting. A lot of references were made to, the fact that he secretly appointed himself to not one, not two, but 8 ministries during his time as a leader during the pandemic. And I know that the timeline doesn't kind of match up, but a lot of the comments were drawing attention to some of the, I don't hold a hose mate saga during Black Friday. And essentially people are just asking who signed this off. So it'll be very interesting to track these reactions this morning.
To the US, where 2,000 National Guard troops have arrived in Los Angeles as protests against raids on undocumented migrants enters its third day. The protest kicked off on Friday after 118 people were arrested over suspected immigration violations in the city's southeast by Federal Immigration and Customs, or ICE, agents. Some scenes turning violent and destructive.
It was on Saturday LA time, so yesterday for us, that President Donald Trump ordered the National Guard move in, not from behind his desk at the White House, Tara Cassidy, but from New Jersey, where he was attending a UFC event.
Well, if you thought it couldn't get any more festive inside Prudential Center, the President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, flanked by our UFC CEO, Dana White.
As we record, the troops have arrived in camouflaged vehicles carrying automatic weapons.
Now, Trump says the troops are needed to crack down on rioters and looters, while the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, says it is inflammatory with enough state and local personnel on the ground. He's accused the administration of being less interested in law enforcement, rather looking to create a spectacle, calling on protesters to remain peaceful.
A candlelight vigil will be held in central Queensland today for 17-year-old Pheobe Bishop, who died after going missing from the small town of Gingin last month. On Friday, a crime scene was declared in Bundaberg's Goodnight Scrub National Park after human remains were located, with Phoebe's family now waiting for forensic testing to formally identify her body. Phoebe's two housemates, James Wood and Tamika Bromley, have since been charged with her murder.
Yesterday, at a vigil in Gingin where Phoebe had been living, hundreds of people gathered donning bright colours and butterflies in memory of the teen. She was described as fiercely protective, wild and curious, with Phoebe's mum Kylie Johnson and her sister Kaylee Bishop sharing tearful tributes.
Phoebe always sung her own tune. She lived to the fullest. She loved the people that she loved to every extent of the earth. And that is what we need to hang on to. 17 years was never enough for her life. But in the short 17 years that she was with us, God, she gave us a run for our bloody money. But she was loyal to the core to everybody she loved.
A second candlelight vigil will be held for Phoebe in Bundaberg at 5 p.m. today.
Changing pace now, a record number of young Aussies are working more than one part-time job to make ends meet. Figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing nearly 500,000 Aussies now have at least two part-time jobs, up 6% from last year, with women and those under the age of 25 mostly represented.
As to the number of people with multiple jobs, whether full or part-time, more generally, that's surged in the past 5 years, with an extra 220,000 Aussies picking up at least one other job since December 2019. But analysts describe that as a post-pandemic trend. ABS data showing the number of people with multiple jobs peaked at 990,000 late last year and is now starting to ease as more full-timers give up their part-time gigs.
Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours.
Nearly 3/4 of Aussies don't feel like they know their neighbours, with a new report showing 72% of us don't care to, a massive shift from attitudes 2 decades ago. The Real Neighbours report data interviewed thousands of Aussies, finding many of us socialise less with our neighbours than generations before, avoid saying hello, and even send passive-aggressive messages.
Ooh. 62% of respondents said they'd lived 6 months in a property without ever meeting the people next door. That was over 70% for Gen Z and Y, and majority feel their privacy's been invaded by at least one neighbour. Better news for those of us that actually greet them. Apparently, 9 in 10 of us are happy to at least do that. However, that's only 30% of Gen Z and, of course, 73% of baby boomers. But all in all, 2/3 of us feel our neighbours are overall helpful and likeable.
I find this so interesting. I think my partner and I are this exact survey in real life.
Oh, very good.
Whereas I'm very happy to kind of like shy away. Like I'll say hello, but I don't need to like, I don't know, have a real great friendship and ongoing thing with my neighbours. Whereas my partner's like besties. He was over the next door neighbour with the 70-year-old neighbour having scones the other day. Like, but he is one generation apart from me, so maybe that's what it is.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love that you've got this story too for you guys, because I've always grown up knowing my neighbours, having relationships with my neighbours, because my mum's always been of the opinion that a way to anyone's heart is through food. The first thing we do whenever people move in, mum goes over with a plate of baked treats or food. So we are very friendly with our neighbours. Like, my neighbour next door taught me how to tie my first tie on my first day of high school. And like, over the weekend, I was out clubbing with my neighbour across the road. People find it very strange, but I love that there is some concrete data here backing me up when people look at me like I'm a freak, when I'm like, I love my neighbours.
I also thought it was funny. They said Sutherland and Sydney was the most friendly when it came to neighbours, and Cairns in Queensland and SA's southeast. But unfriendliest was New South Wales, Central West, Ballarat and Inner Melbourne. You unfriendly folk.
We love it. And if you're listening in any of those areas, please, we are not alienating you. We love having you here, and just go say hello to your neighbours. Tara, that brings our headlines to a close for today. Next up is my deep dive, looking into one of AFL's biggest events of the year and also one of Australia's most visible health campaigns. That's the Big Freeze, and that deep dive is coming up for you next. If you've ever flicked on the AFL's King or Queen's birthday clash over the last decade, chances are you've seen a bunch of celebs and sports stars slipping and sliding their way into a pool of ice before the game. And if you're in Victoria especially, you've almost definitely seen the blue beanies popping up at work, on public transport and in stadiums right across the state all winter long. But behind the big freeze and the wildly popular beanies is something far more serious. Inspired by the viral success of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, the event launched in 2014 as part of a push to bring motor neuron disease, or MND, out of the shadows. Now, it stands as one of Australia's most visible health campaigns and fundraising efforts for the incurable disease, with Olympic swimmer Ariarne Titmus and Sunrise host Matt Shirvington among those braving the icy waters at the MCG today ahead of the Melbourne-Collingwood clash. Matt Tilley, he's the CEO of FightMND, the organisation behind the big freeze. Matt, welcome to the briefing. To kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about the organisation and why it was first established?
It's only 11 years old, which is pretty young for a charity, but it was basically established by three people. Dr. Ian Davis, who was battling MND, a guy called Pat Cunningham, whose wife Angie he lost to MND, and Neil Danaher, the current Australian of the Year, who is still with us, who is still fighting after 11 years. And basically what they wanted to do was accelerate towards a cure. They were very much focused on scientific research and the fact that MND was first diagnosed 150 years ago, but no progress had been made.
So can you explain to someone listening, what does daily life look like for someone living with MND?
Look, it's a great question, and basically it's a long, torturous path towards losing all your faculties. So the motor neurons are really like the messengers to all the muscular parts of your body. And the average life expectancy for somebody diagnosed with MND is about 27 months. So someone like Neil Danaher, who's been going for 11 years, is a real outlier. And it also means, with the law of averages, obviously, that some people 6 months, 8 months. And what happens is it might start with perhaps you feel like your ankle's not working properly or you're tripping up a bit, or maybe your speech is a bit slurry. But what you're doing is you're losing loss of muscular and motor function. Then you start to lose your capacity to walk. If it starts in your legs, sometimes it can start in your arms, so you can't pick things up. And it gets sinister pretty quickly. So ultimately, you lose your capacity to swallow, to speak, to eat, and basically, most people, the last thing that goes is their mind and their eyes. And that's why people late in motor neurone disease use eye gauge technology, where they can communicate with the outside world by just simply looking at an iPad interface and typing words. But in the end, your lungs stop working. And so that's pretty much all over.
Yeah, well, you know, it is something that the Big Freeze and this event and your organisation has worked tirelessly to raise awareness towards. It's become a big cultural moment in parts of Australia. Why do you think it's resonated so deeply with Australians?
Well, I think, you know, it's no secret Australians kind of love sport, and we're a big country, so there's lots of regional and local communities. And I think what happens in times of turmoil, or when there's, you know, some sort of disaster, whether it be emotional or physical, people get around each other down at the local sports club, or perhaps RSLs. Venues like that, it's a very Australian sort of thing. And so because Neil Danaher was well known in AFL circles as a football coach, and he'd gone far and wide. He'd played at one club, coached another, he'd been in the administration, so he had a lot of connections, deep-rooted connections into the broader footy community. And I just think that's something that's very Australian. It's not necessarily footy, it's cricket clubs, it's a lot where people go, you know what, this isn't right. We need to get around this person and we're going to rally and we're going to do what we can. But being particularly Australian, we're going to do it with a bit of a laugh, because that's kind of who we are. So we're going to wear silly beanies and we're going to tip ice on ourselves because we want to feel good about doing good.
Yeah, well, obviously the ice slide is kind of the big headline, and that's what we're talking about today. But what else does the campaign involve behind the scenes? Essentially, like, what work is going on that just the everyday public or the everyday Australian just doesn't see?
Yeah, well, obviously hundreds of thousands of beanies are made. I think we have the world's most elite pom-pom making machine.
Yeah.
But I think the critical thing that people don't realise is part of FightMND, we have a large scientific programs team. And all of them have PhDs. One of them has 2 PhDs. And they are some of the best and brightest from the research and science community who've come to us. And they coordinate how we distribute the money. So we don't just hand it out to anyone who rings up and says they're doing a bit of research. It's absolutely critical that it's going to the best and the brightest minds, and I guess people right at the cutting edge of research and science technology. So we open up grant rounds, and universities and laboratories from across the world apply for our grants. And this team has to sort of assemble a group of very high-level scientists, professors, heads of faculties, who then assess those grants and rate them and scale them, and then ultimately we make decisions about where we think the money's best spent and where the research should go. Now, people probably think, oh, okay, wouldn't you get the government to do that or whatever? But we do that ourselves. And because we've grown and because, we're a backwater, there wasn't even any clinical trials in Australia for people with MND 10 years ago before we came along, but we've made a bit of noise and we've made a bit of money, and we're now a bit of an epicentre. So last year we flew in, some of the best and brightest minds from around the world, from Oxford Uni and Johns Hopkins in America, sat them in a room and said, put your laptops away. We're going to get some butcher's paper. We're going to go, why aren't you talking to you? And what's the problem that you're facing that they could fix? And does everybody think they could share their data? And then maybe we're not replicating stuff in different countries. So we've taken a little bit of a leadership role as well, outside the fundraising role. I think people would be surprised to learn that, but I think Australians are always surprised that we sort of punch above our weight. But it's not only in the Olympics, we're doing it here in the world of scientific and medical research as well.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important for someone listening who has seen the beanies around or kind of flicks on the telly and sees the event, but, is still wondering kind of what goes on behind the scenes. You mentioned clinical trials there. Have we had any other breakthroughs or something in this space that we can talk about today?
Look, if you had a 5-hour podcast, I'd be all in for it. But, in a word, little steps here and there. We're on the cusp of certain things, but I guess the easiest way is to sort of equate it to cancer and go, well, cancer's many different forms and types, and MND is like that too. But there's one little story that's amazing. So about 5% of people who are diagnosed with MND, it's a familial strain. So that means that possibly their brothers and sisters are susceptible because of the genes that they have, right? And in this one particular case, for some people, they have found a drug that can not only stop the effects and the degeneration, but also, I guess, people regain some of their faculties. I met a young woman called Paula last year and saw some video of her struggling to walk upstairs using 2 sticks. And then she got up in the room and walked to the lectern and spoke. That's a bit of a 1 in a million, but it tells you that the doors just creaked open a bit in one particular area of research. So we want to kick it down, as it were, and keep going.
You mentioned Paula there. So these are real people, everyday Australians who are living with this condition. What do other people who live with MND say to you and your organisation about the work that you're doing? How important is the work that you're doing for them?
There's one word they use all the time. This is a really easy question to answer. They say, what you give us is hope. I think for people who know that they're going to die, who every moment with their family is cherished because, is this the last time I do this? Will I never do this again? Will I not be able to hug my kids? Because I can't physically move my limbs anymore. But they're like, it mightn't be for me, but it might be for the next person. But the thing that helps me get through every day is hope, and knowing that there are people out there that they haven't even met who care enough to make a difference, make a donation, and just grow that hope.
Well, it is game day today. For anyone listening who, like me, didn't grow up around AFL but is contemplating now lending an eye or two to the telly, give us the sell, give us the elevator pitch.
Well, the elevator pitch is this. Even if you don't love the sport, the Big Freeze slide this year is iconic Australians because Neil is the Australian of the Year. Now, you don't have to love footy to love Ariana Titmus, Mark Taylor, Cadell Evans. Like, there's just a whole cavalcade of Australia's greatest sporting names, all dressing up in ridiculous costumes and all going down a slide into a huge ice bath. And I think in the year that Neil's the Australian of the Year, that's the spirit of it all. It's not so much about the footy match. There'll be 80,000 people sitting in the MCG with beanies. But for everyone around Australia, I'd encourage them to do this. And this is something we've done this year to really appeal to the whole nation because Neil's Australian of the Year. You can go to bigfreeze.com.au, simple website, bigfreeze.com.au, and buy a digital beanie. So that's really just a $25 donation. But you can put your name across or your nickname, no swear words, and that's a $25 donation, so you get a tax-deductible receipt too. So for people in the warmer climates who go, I'm not wearing a beanie, or people in Queensland who go, I'm definitely not wearing a blue beanie, the digital beanie, I think, could be your best friend this year. And we're trying to sell 100,000 of them across this King's Birthday weekend, which is so special to Neil Danaher, of course. And we just hope that Australia can get right behind it.
Matt Tilley, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was CEO of FightMND, Matt Tilley, speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.